Welcome back, everybody. This is Eric and Chad here with Iraq Veteran 8888. Today we have another Gun Gripe episode for you. All right, and we're going to be talking about running your guns dry. We're complaining about dry guns, so we're going to talk about lubricant today.
Yeah, not alcohol.
Yeah, not that kind of dry. We're talking the kind of dry where everything goes. It sounds like metal's just scraping and rubbing against it. So
you get that smell, like you rub it enough and that aluminum starts to heat up and you're like, how was that burning smell? What is it?
Yeah. So we're going to be talking about running your guns dry and the correct level of lubrication and everything like that. And of course, there's probably going to be some dad jokes get dropped in this video. Just prepare for that. So we're going to get into it, but before we do, I want to thank our friends at Sonoran Desert Institute for supporting our videos. If you're looking for a career in the gunsmithing world and wanting to get into the gun industry in that way, they have a bunch of great programs, awesome curriculum, great instructors. It is a distance learning program in terms of the way they're set up. They also offer drone flying classes. They got some great reloading courses. If you're looking for higher education in that regard, definitely check them out. A great group of people. Sonoran Desert Institute, SDI. Tell them we sent you. And a big thanks to them for supporting our efforts here on the channel in the 2A realm.
Go over there and learn how to lube your AR.
Yeah, for real. Yeah, they'll teach you how to lube your AR properly. This is generally just sort of a very general pet peeve, if you will. Like, I know that many of you have opened up a brand new gun or whatever and pulled it out. It's like, oh man, this thing's dry as a cob. Like, you don't feel smooth at all, And when you look at instructional information on guns that are included in like instruction manual, right? What's one of the things that they always say in the instruction manual? They say to go through and disassemble the gun and clean all of the factory preservatives off of it. Clean the barrel out of all the factory preservatives and then lubricate the gun. That's all good and fine. But I know probably more times than not what ends up happening, especially when you're talking ARs. Those ARs come so dry, and I know that you know what I'm talking about, where the aluminum, the anodizing on the aluminum is so dry it has that sort of pasty look, and you bring that bolt back and it just makes a god-awful racket and sound. And
nails on a chalkboard.
Yes, and you think, what in the world am I going to put on this freaking thing to get rid of that awful sound and to make that bolt nice and smooth? And look, there's an art to lubricating your rifle or pistol or otherwise any other semi-automatic firearm with a bunch of moving parts to achieve optimal performance.
Mm-hmm. Well, down in the swamp, we like to use, gator fat.
Gator fat. It probably works.
Gator lard.
I mean, but there is a such thing as over-lubing.
Oh, yeah.
It can have too much lube on it. Okay. Well,
Here we go.
Look. Okay, the gun can have too much lubricant too. And that can pose a lot of varying problems as well. So, what's the correct amount? What type of lubricant should you use? Maybe we'll talk a little bit about dissimilar metals too. Because ARs are pretty unique in that, you do have situations where dissimilar metals go together. And also, earlier Chad had mentioned, on cheaper rifles, maybe like the castle nut not being staked. Over time you shoot the gun and that castle nut starts to walk off. That's frustrating. Little fit and finish issues, lubrication, things like that. Where do we want to start? Because there's a lot to talk about.
I think, say we start at basic lubrication, and we're talking about ARs, right? So,
sure.
You get a brand new AR, and take a cleaning patch and run it through the barrel, and get any residual oil out of the barrel before you fire it. That's kind of a given out of the chamber too. But the way I like to lubricate ARs is I like to put just a drop of oil on the bolt itself. Literally, I just pull the charging handle back sometimes, and I just put a little drop of oil on the bolt, and then I put about a drop in each little port that you see, where you can lubricate the gas rings through there as well. And if you're using a phosphate carrier, right, a standard military spec phosphated carrier, all right, it's like a textured surface, so that oil will kind of creep all around. You don't need much, just a few drops on the carrier will get all the way around where you need to go. You're pulling that charging handle back, put you a couple of drops on top of the charging handle, and then let it go, and it'll all creep where it needs to creep.
Yep.
I mean, you can drop maybe a drop or two in the upper itself, because that'll kind of lubricate the little guide rails that are on the carrier. where it rides pretty close to the, like on the upper receiver. It kind of rides in place. And over time, things will smooth out a lot. But that's usually what I do. If you want to take the carrier out, you can, and you can lubricate it with a patch if you want to, but it doesn't require a lot. Now, like nitrided and like nickel Teflon or nickel boron carriers and stuff, they've got sort of a higher, it's like a higher...
the lubricity.
Yeah, higher lubricity than a phosphated carrier. So they don't technically require lubrication, but you always want to put like a light coat on it, but it doesn't have the same characteristics like a phosphate does, where it'll spread. You have to manually put it in place.
On the AR and lower, where the trigger surfaces are, I like to put a bit of oil on the edge of the hammer surface where it rides on the bottom of the carrier. I like to have a little bit of slickness there. And also like the disconnector hook that goes forward, I like to put a little grease on that, something with a little more staying power than just regular oil or whatever. In fact, the whole trigger mechanism, I generally anywhere where hooks engage or any flat surfaces engage against each other, a lot of times on those triggers you'll see that'll be a polished surface where they've been surface ground to make up that geometry, especially on a nicer trigger like a Geisley. You'll notice those surface ground areas, and that's why a Geisley trigger ships with that little tube of grease.
They used to.
That you can,
They used to.
They don't include the grease anymore?
Not the ones I've gotten recently.
Well,
I still use grease.
Usually they have a little bit of grease. So I'd recommend something like a big old thing of rig grease. I mean, it lasts forever. And also the copper anti-seize is a good thing to have laying around. I think that's a 3M product. I don't really want this video to necessarily be about products, though. We've done a whole video on lubricants that we use. So if you want to check that out, it's an older video, but it still checks out because we've been using a lot of different things over the years. So I won't bore you with that. I will say that the ALG Go Juice is probably one of our go-tos for the type of lubrication that Chad's talking about on the bolt mechanism itself.
One thing that really irks me is when you crack the rear takedown pin on a brand new AR and you pivot the upper from the lower and you look down in there and it looks like the Sahara in that fire control group, right? I can't stand that. One drop on each side of the pins.
Right.
One drop on each side of the hammer pin and then one drop on each side of the trigger pin. All you need. It'll spread around and, you're good.
So why would you not want to over lubricate? Is there such thing as too much lubricant? I think the problem you start running into when you over lubricate your AR, for one, it can be kind of smoky. You will eventually get some gases that will travel back far enough to create some smokiness and things, which isn't good, and you definitely don't want to breathe that in. But also too, I think then what sort of happens is that you sort of get this nasty sludge. All right, you get all that carbon and it sticks to the oil and it creates this homogeneous goo that is not helpful, right? And then what happens over time, that goo will kind of harden and the oil will either evaporate or creep into the lower or find its way down, and now you've got all that carbon that's left behind, and it creates this kind of gooey texture, which is not helpful. It makes it maybe easier to clean, especially on a titanium nitride or nickel boron or whatever, something like that, some sort of good lubricity surface. Okay, it might help with with it being sludgy. You can just wipe it off with a cloth. That's one of the nice things about those types of coatings. But generally speaking, especially with a standard phosphated part that's got the crystalline structure of the metal, if you were to look at it like under a microscope, it's like little, lots of little small areas for that oil to creep into, like a parkerized finish in some ways, right? It might make it a little bit nasty a lot quicker. It'll hold more grime and more crap if you over lubricate it.
So the parkerized finish is manganese phosphate parkerizing, and it is designed to hold and retain lubricant and protectant.
If you're ever Duracoating or Cerakoting something, and you start out with a parkerized finish, that's always a great way to get your finishes to adhere a lot better. So a lot of people, they don't really do this as much anymore, but like when I was still spraying Duracoat, I would tell people, hey, let me parkerize this part first, and then we'll pull the part out of the tank, and while it's dry, the heat from the park tank is going to allow the water to evaporate, And of course, we plug the barrel. And then when that part is absolutely dry with nothing on it, that's when we're going to spray our Duracoat. And that Duracoat finds its way into all those little crevices, and it adheres extremely well. That's the best way to adhere Cerakote and Duracoat is to a parkerized finish. Now, if you already have a parkerized finish and you just want to Cerakote or Duracoat it, that's fine. You want to make sure you go through and degrease that part extremely well. I'm talking really well, because those finishes are designed to hold lubricant and to hold oil and everything like that. You look at those old Garands that have the zinc phosphating. That's more of a gray finish. The gray parkerized is zinc phosphate. And that zinc phosphate, when they would put storage grease on the gun to preserve it in long-term storage, and over time, that grease on that zinc phosphating would sort of oxidize and turn this kind of blue-green color, and it would permanently color the metal, that blue-green kind of color, almost a greenish hue that you get on that zinc phosphate. And so much to the degree that people are like, oh man, I want to find a vintage Garand with a zinc phosphate finish that's got this really cool, green looking kind of, marine looking sort of finish.
Patina.
Yeah. And so much to the point that people have gone out of their way to develop parkerizing solutions that artificially turn the gun green. I digress. We're getting off topic. But the point is, parkerizing has its place. And it's a pretty cool finish, and it's an easy finish to apply too. It's pretty easy to do.
All right. So where's a lot of the racket come from on a brand new AR that's bone dry?
The buffer spring.
Oh yeah. So like most of the manuals that you see, they'll tell you just put a couple of drops of CLP or whatever in the buffer and spread it around with a patch or whatever, or swab. A little bit of lubricant on the buffer spring itself. That's all you need.
I lube the heck out of mine.
I like grease. So I like Lubriplate. So, those little acid brushes that you can buy for like applying pipe sealant and things like that?
Yeah.
So I like to just take an acid brush, and I just use it to apply a light coat of Lubriplate to the buffer spring itself.
Lubriplate is a graphite-based lubricant, is it not?
I don't recall, but
I think it has a grease-like carrier, and it's graphite-based. It's gray, isn't it?
It's just a grease. No, it's kind of a tan color. This is what they use on the
reloading presses and stuff.
Well, they use it on. It's the very specific grease for like M14s.
Like old LSA.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, more or less. So
I got you.
But
interesting.
There's a couple of varieties of it, but I just use the standard Lubriplate that's like for the M14s, but it's like this kind of tannish, real thick grease. Yeah. And
it's just a commercial version of LSA, the old school LSA.
So, anyways, I'll take a swab and just put a little bit in the buffer tube itself, and that like silences that crap. And, people will use lithium grease. I've seen people use like the red grease that you would typically use on grease zerks on cars and things, or tractor parts or whatever. That's a little bit too heavy for me. I think like just a light coating of something like LSA or rig or anything like that is fine. But the general consensus is thicker the grease, the more carbon and other deposits and dirt and stuff might get trapped in there and just start to cause a kind of a mess. But
there's certain protocols for lubricating certain rifles, right? Like on the Garand and the M14, and I would even say the M1 carbine as well. Like the track that the carrier rides in with the charging handle attached to it, that whole area there is usually lubricated with a fair amount of a heavy lubricant like an LSA or a light grease or something like that. And especially the rotational axis that is applied to the bolt itself. There's a rotational lug that goes on all of those actions, whether it's an M1A, M14, M1 Garand. Also, that has to be lubricated pretty well. So you can't use a light lube for that. Use a relatively heavy lube that kind of stays in place. Now, those gun designs are a little bit older school, but it all depends on the individual gun and the way that it's designed. I think we could probably switch gears a little bit. I mean, think about a Glock, all right? When you buy a factory Glock, brand new, and you take it apart, and you notice that they apply a general amount of copper anti-seize to a lot of different areas. One thing to pay attention to is where they apply that lubricant.
And how much.
And how much they apply that lubricant. When you take your Glock apart for the first time and you clean all that lubricant away, now they put the anti-seize on there to kind of break the pistol in. So what I tell people is don't get rid of the anti-seize. Shoot the gun for 1,000 or 1,500 rounds before you ever clean it. And let that anti-seize do its job to help break the pistol in. But bear in mind where the anti-seize is so that when you go to lubricate your gun again after you clean the anti-seize off, you need to put lubricant back in those areas where Glock lubricates it from the factory. So those are little things to consider. And also, read the dang instruction manual, people. Like, the instructions will tell you how to lubricate the gun and where and what frequency and how often you should clean it and how to disassemble it and how to put it back together. Believe it or not, those manuals, you pick it up and you open it and you read it and you receive the information. And some manuals have a lot of nerdy data in them. Look at the F.K. Burnett pistol manual, all the detailed information about that pistol that's in that manual. Wasn't that fascinating to read?
Yeah.
And they go into a lot of detail.
You read it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But there's a lot of nerdy stuff like in some of those manuals. So your manual's there for a reason. Read it. Open it up and do the little,
The manuals are only there for liability purposes.
Well, some people it is. But, the manual can give you a lot of interesting details if it's written well.
So the general rule of thumb with lubricating any firearm, if it moves, lube it.
If it moves,
if
lube
it's
it.
metal on metal, where that metal on metal contact is,
Lube it.
That's right.
That's it.
I think that what would be some other gun designs that we could point to that, maybe are kind of infamously known for being important to lubricate? I mean, really any semi-auto.
Mention like LSA and M1 Garands and everything with the roller cams. Those are essential to lubricate. Absolutely. Yeah. But, really any firearm benefits from having proper lubrication because, number one, it prevents premature wear of the components, right? Because the lubricant creates kind of a barrier between those components for it to, ride on without as much friction as if it was just dry as a bone, dry as a cob.
Yeah, and you certainly wouldn't want to run into a reliability issue on an item that you're going to protect your life with, like a carry gun. Yeah. You wouldn't want to run your carry gun dry. All right, here's another interesting point of contention.
Helps with heat dissipation and stuff as well. So.
Here's another point of contention about that would be on your carry gun. All right, think about all the dust bunnies you get all over your gun, pocket lint, and no telling what else, right? If you over-lubricate your carry gun, what happens? All that lube starts to creep out. Where does all that stuff stick? It sticks to all that lubricant. So if you over-lubricate your carry pistol, now all those dust bunnies are going to, they're going to cling on to every little bit of open amount of lubrication. So I don't over-lubricate my carry gun. I obviously make sure it's lubed, but I don't lube it to the point that there's crap creeping out of it. And now every little random speck of dirt and dust bunny and pocket lint and everything from the nether sticks to it. Well, so that's something to consider. Just don't over lubricate, but don't run it dry either.
Speaking of over lubricating too, from the point of a carry gun, right? All right, if you're carrying it, the orientation of the gun is going to be vertical, right? So if you over lubricate it, gravity is a thing. So all the oil is going to creep and run somewhere. So it'll run down from the action into your chamber area and
could cause a malfunction.
Yes. So same thing with ARs. I've seen some very heavily lubricated ARs where it literally had pools of oil built up in the barrel extension, where the locking lug recess is. So, that can cause, like you mentioned, smoke and foul odors and things like that. But also it can cause an overpressure, dangerous situation if it creeps in the chamber and you're winding up, taking up space in the chamber with oil, maybe out of battery situations. Especially if it gets clogged up with all kinds of crud and dirt and debris. So like you mentioned, read the manual. The specifications for lubrication are there for a reason, like the proper amounts. Like usually you'll see lightly lubricate, moderately lubricate, heavily lubricate. Certain parts can handle more lubrication because they're not super critical areas. They just need the lube to operate properly.
Mm-hmm. One other thing I want to mention, and then I think this is going to pretty much handle this video. I can't tell you how many times when I was working, with Ray up at Moss and dealing with gunsmithing problems, how many times that we would have a hunting rifle come in of some various type where the user, lubricated the ever-loving mess out of it now whatever lubricant is irrelevant, but let's just say they sprayed it down on WD-40 or something, to keep it wet. Because the general idea is, well, if it's wet, it's well lubricated and it's going to work. And it probably will work, right? Even with WD-40. Hey, WD-40 is fine. Like, a lot of people use that on their guns, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I can't tell you how many times I've seen like a wooden stocked hunting rifle, like a Remington 7400 or something like that.
Oh, boy.
Come in with a oil-soaked stock from where they lubed it, used it in the field, and then sat it in the closet. And what happens to all that lubricant? It's going to work its way down, it's going to flow down, and it's going to oil-soak that stock. And it's going to weaken the stock. So you don't want to get oil all over that stock. That oil soak will weaken the stock, okay? That's something to consider, right? So just like you wouldn't want your carry gun and having the oil seep down in the chamber and down into the barrel, that ain't good, right? You don't want a whole bunch of oil in your receiver extension or your barrel extension on the AR. Same thing for your hunting rifles. You don't want to over-lubricate your fine Turkish walnut sporting rifle, right? And come back a year later and there's a nasty little soft spot where the oil soak has gotten to it. And it happens a lot with military surplus rifles too. Like when you're buying old school milsurps, look for oil soak because it can weaken the stock. You can get cracks. It can fail. I mean, depending on how long the oil soak is there, it'll get real soft. You see it a lot on British Enfields. A lot. That rear stock assembly will always be full of oil because the way the receiver design on the Enfield is, if the guns are over lubricated, that oil will absolutely oil soak that stock and weaken it to the point where you go to shoot it, it might crack or split. So that's something else to consider. Over lubricating comes in a lot of different forms, and that's one thing you want to watch out for. If you're running a wooden stock on your hunting rifle, don't put so much lubricant on there that it's going to soak that stock. That's not where you want to be, especially on something collectible and valuable,
You mentioned the 7400. I remember some of those coming in that would be over lubricated and put up, and then basically the little bit of carbon that was in the action basically glued the bolt shut because it's that interrupted thread design,
right?
And like it wasn't very finely machined. They were pretty rough machined.
And they had help from the get go.
Yeah, so like it would like literally turn to glue. And those actions would just be locked shut. You have to beat it open, basically.
And then I've seen situations on that rifle design, too, where people would not care for them properly at all. And then you get the slightest bit of corrosion on those buttress threads, those interrupted thread, that style of thread. And with that rough machining, you get a little bit of that rust and corrosion. That's it. That thing's going to be seized up. And you're going to have to pull it apart and figure out where the rust is and carefully remove it and possibly even take like some small diamond files and kind of like clean some of those surfaces up a little bit to get rid of that sharpness. It's not a dig on Remington. Look, Remington makes a fine rifle, and they still do today. But some of those 7400s, the 7600, 7400, the 7000 series semi-auto hunting rifles, 270, 30-06, you know what I'm talking about. They, without getting off on a tangent on those, the machining on them was a little rough in some cases. Some of them were better than others, but that's just something to consider. I mean, like, I don't want to get off on this, but like the old Ross straight pull service rifles were kind of the same way, like a little rough, So just kind of keep that in mind that every gun is unique and every one is a little bit special in its own way and requires its own unique lubrication properties that you need to know about, So it's always important to do some research and make sure that you're lubricating your gun properly and not over lubricating. And keeping that firearm working for you in the long term. Any other interesting things you want to talk about? Any other stories you can think of like that?
Stories? I'll tell you a story, boy. No, I don't really have anything else.
I remember when we over-lubricated the chamber on my SB2 10 gauge. I mean, we kept getting stuck cases, and I had to scrub the chamber out.
What was when I was younger, I lubricated some ammunition in that Hess receiver, that G3 that I had.
I remember that.
It was made on a Hess receiver, and they were, I didn't know at the time they were real crap. And the only way I can get it to work is if I sprayed, I think I was using Strike Hold. I was spraying Strike Hold on that surplus, M80 ball.
It worked. But knowing what we know now,
don't do that.
Probably not a good idea. But let's just be happy that guns are pretty overbuilt.
Well, it flew to chamber too, so it had somewhere for that
lubricant to go.
Oh, it went there. It went there. I remember those cases were wrecked too. They looked terrible.
Gosh.
Probably overpressure.
That was well before like really got into reloading and all too. But I wouldn't have tried to reload those things anyways. Flew to chamber, but biggest thing like this gripe just came around because of the like just new AR like feel, sound, smell. All the senses are just they're just like damaged by that. You know.
That's one of my pet peeves for sure. I can't stand a dry gun, you know. So I suppose one quick point could be made for game, let's say for hunting purposes. Okay? You're in the field.
Leave your bullets.
Well, no. You've got, like, let's say your favorite hunting rifle and you're going to lubricate it to go in the field and go hunting or whatever. I mean, yeah, you want to lubricate your gun. I have heard some stories. Now, look, this is the internet. You just take it for what you will. I can't necessarily say that this is a situation I've ever had a problem with, but I've heard that some gun oils can have an offensive odor that scare game. I haven't really tested that theory. I just lube my guns and go in the woods and don't worry about it. But at the same time, I'm not caking my whole gun down with Sweet 762 that smells like piss.
Ammonia,
or with, ammonia. Yeah, well, not that you would leave that on your gun. Yeah. But the point is, though, certain chemicals or oils having an offensive odor that I've heard people say, it scares the animals if they smell the gun oil. I can't say I've ever had that issue. I can't point to that with any definitive positive result, but you know, it's the internet.
I think you'd have more concern over what you smell like than anything else.
That's always been my
what is it? Mama says that gator fat don't smell and don't scare no gators away.
Yeah. Deer walking through woods and goes, that's COP. There's a redneck over there. I just know it.
No,
come on, Junior. We're going to take another way.
No, man. No, you got it all wrong. What do rednecks use?
WD-40.
WD-40, man. Come on.
Now, that ain't WD-40 for a creaky deer stand. That's WD-40 for a hunting rifle.
A hunting rifle. Oh, man.
Old Jim Bob's over there somewhere.
I smell it mixed with last year's carbon from that shot he missed Bucky.
Yep, one shot every year. Take it out of the closet and shoot one time.
Hey, Bobby, I think that's the man who missed you last year. You think so?
Yeah, I think so. I smell it.
I smell this atrocious gun oil.
Oh, my God. I've never heard that before.
I don't think there's a lot of validity in that, but, you know, you hear stories.
I thought you were going to, talk about lubricating your bullets so they go through the air faster. Get to the target faster and get more velocity.
Well, that's about as dumb as you lubricating that ammo and that Hess receiver. I mean, look, you live and learn, and, you know, it's okay to, I mean, look, if you've ever been the kind of person that has over-lubed an AR, you'll find out.
Hey, look, I was poor, and I desperately wanted that cheap ammo to work.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to have to buy a Winchester white box.
I know one thing. I wish we could go back in time when those G3 parts kits were what they were. I think they were $300.
Yeah, the one that I bought
with the barrel,
the one
intact barrel.
Yeah, the one that I bought that I was gonna have built out to replace that gun, I paid $180 for.
Oh man, those were
and
good
when
days.
I sold it, I kept it for a few years, and I sold it for like $450 or something like that because I just couldn't afford. I couldn't afford to buy a receiver and send the gun and pay like $1,000 to have it built.
Think about 20 years from now, right? I got those 2 Steyr AUG kits. Just think about how much those things will be worth in another 2 decades.
Yep.
And we're going to build them out into some full auto Steyr AUGs. That's coming. But we can do that. We got the cool guy license to do that. But it's just interesting when you look at all of it in its totality. But you know, I think that pretty much concludes this gripe that we talked about lubrication. And I know that this might seem like a simple subject to some. You know, probably some of you more experienced folks out there are like, all right, why aren't we talking about this for 30 minutes? But maybe there's some things we laid out in this video that help some people learn that maybe they don't understand, you know, that you even need to lubricate guns at all. I mean, think about the people that buy a car and they don't read the manual. They don't take care of it and maintain it or nothing. They, you know, there was one English teacher I had in high school that she was pretty thick. I mean, don't get me wrong. She was a smart lady, but she told us a story one time in class where she said, my first car that I bought, I drove it, and one day it quit working. And I called my husband. And I said, well, this is a brand new car. I just bought it. And he said, Well, honey, look down at the little gauge down there. It says E and F. Where's the gauge? She says, oh, it says E. You have to put gas in it, honey. You know, you have to fill it up with gas. Like, it's not just like, how do you think a car works? Yeah. You got to put fuel in it. And it's like some people literally don't know, like, that you have to lubricate your gun, that you have to clean your gun, that, you know, that ammunition and magazine compatibility, like, those are all considerations with that a firearm is a tool that uses moving parts, and all those things have to be properly maintained to be working properly. So just something to think about. We wanted this video to kind of help some of the new gun owners out there that maybe don't understand about lubrication, and maybe this will point you in the right direction. So big thanks to everybody. Hey, thanks so much for tuning in. I hope everyone had a fantastic day, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. Many more on the way. We'll see you soon.
See you guys.